Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And today is a solo show for me. I'll be reviewing the recent debate between Yaron, Brook, and Yoram Hazony. Now, the sort of dilemma, I think, is that Yaron is how his name should be pronounced. But I sense that over the years of him living in the U.S., people would keep calling him Yaron until he finally went along with that. But now that he's debating a guy named Yoram, it sounds a lot like Yoram. It's gotten very confusing. So luckily, I have the technology to pronounce their names as God intended. I'm kidding with that, phrasing, but as the way that they were dubbed at birth: Yoram Hazony and Yaron Brook. All right, let's jump right into this, and I hope you've gotten a chance to see the debate. It's actually not yet on YouTube. But if you're a member of this channel, I think you got a link to the debate when it was live, and you could watch it, the recording of it, at that same link via the members WhatsApp group. So if you're not a member of ARC UK, this is one of the many, many moments in which you're probably reflecting on your life and all the mistakes you've made and thinking, is there any way to fix this? And yes, become a member of ARC UK for many such opportunities. I am sick, by the way. My throat began hurting last night. I'm guessing it's the climate I've moved to, this uninhabitable swamp. But then don't get too excited. It just might be the return of COVID-19. Wouldn't that be fun? It would give us a lot to talk about. It would bring us closer together. And see, this is my relationship building, team building muscle here. Flexing and strengthening, which we're going to get into with some of the content that Yoram was bringing up during his debate with Yaron. So the first thing I want to say, since a lot of the audience of this channel and of this show, I think, are largely people who are on board with Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism, I want to sort of share my thought, which is I don't think it would do us any good to laugh at people like Yoram or laugh at Ben Shapiro. And I'm not going to pretend I've never done it. But when they say things that seem outlandish, especially with regards to marriage, especially with regards to, okay, I'll give an example. When Yoram said during the debate that, he says, my wife and I give honor to each other as we're commanded to do. What I mean by give honor, it's basically you find ways to suck up to your spouse. It's very easy to laugh at that, but let's remember, how do I put this? We don't really know him. We don't really know these people. Like, we don't really know what their marriage looks like. And sometimes people can kind of cite something from their religious text that sounds outrageous and absurd, but it's not necessarily being carried out the way that it sounds. So I'll also add, people in glass houses should not throw stones, as the saying goes. So I think that means when you're in a vulnerable state, as students of objectivism, advocates of Ayn Rand's philosophy everyone laughs at us, obviously, virtually everyone. I mean, a lot of the things that Ayn Rand says sound outlandish to the uninitiated. So let's not throw stones in that respect. I think Yoram Hazony's main point is that individualism is incomplete and unsustainable. So yes, individualism is a great aspect, working on yourself, improving yourself. What he means by improving yourself might not mean what I mean by improve yourself. And the motivation, I think, as Yaron pointed out, is the difference in the standard of value. So the standard of value, according to objectivism, I take it to be your life as the standard of value, specifically your life. And basically all of your considerations should align with that standard. But with Yoram Hazony, of course, the standard of value is, let's say, you plus other stuff. So he won't quite let you be the final consideration when making ethical decisions. And something that Yoram does, and many philosophers have done, and many people have done when they ask you to somewhat renounce or to compromise or to not be selfish, is that they'll point out that the way they see it, selfishness is a dead-end road. And that's very much what I think Yoram Hazony was saying during the debate. It's a dead-end road and it's incomplete. It only gets you so far, selfishness. A lot of conservatives, Dennis Prager, makes this point as well. But I think there's a large gap. There's a large rift. There's a lot of daylight between them and Ayn Rand in terms of defining terminology. So what Ayn Rand means by selfishness does not mean hedonism. It does not mean just focus, let's say, on your career, because they know that Ayn Rand emphasizes career and productivity. But it doesn't mean that you should further your career at the cost of, let's say, your family, or that you should further your career and while violating other people's rights, or just in general that furthering your career should be done with no further other considerations. That is not what Ayn Rand says. Everything to Ayn Rand is within context. So I think there's a large misunderstanding. So something Yoram Hazony has said in the past, and I think he a little bit said in this recent debate, is that individualism basically brought us this mess that we have. And a lot of people today, people on the right, people on the left, they point the finger at one another and they say, look what your side has brought us. So the people on the left, they say, look what unfettered capitalism has brought us, all these problems. Or the identitarian left, they'll say like, oh, look what the white patriarchy has brought upon us, all these problems in the world. And on the flip side, of course, people on the right say, look at what all these navel-gazing individualists have brought upon us. All these spoiled brats now demand that you speak a certain way, and they're basically softening America, turning America or all Western countries into weak, politically correct, opposite of patriarchies, I guess, gynoocracies, I don't know, something that is kind of like run by softer, feminine types. And I think Yoram Hazony he sees the social justice warriors as like spoiled youths that grew up in a very self-entitled culture where they were always told, here's your participation trophy and you're special and whatever you feel is perfectly valid and just follow the way you feel and the world is your oyster. Yoram Hazony is saying, look at all the chaos in the world. This was avoidable. The solution was to be a little bit less individualistic, or to have individualism plus concern for your family, your tribe, and your nation, and maybe even a conglomerate of nations. Let's say nations of a certain type might band together for their mutual interests and have, let's say, trade deals, or maybe they'll agree to fight on the same side of the next world war, something like that. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, I think there's a lot right with if you've chosen to have a family. First of all, if you love the family you were born into, if they're basically good people and you have obviously a lot of sentimental connections and a lot of shared memories and strong relationships, then you very much it would be a value to you as an individual to to love and spend time with, and maybe even give some money to the family that birthed you, that you grew up with. And if you've then chosen to start your own family, to marry, to have kids, then of course this is a value you've chosen, and there's a lot to say about sticking with it. So none of this so far contradicts individualism and rational selfishness. Now, when Yoram Hazony talks about your tribe, I say you can completely throw that in the trash. If tribe basically means your extended family, like, just people who happen to be from the same cultural background, some shared ancestry, you can completely throw that in the trash, unless you happen to really enjoy, let's say, the food, the dance, the music, the culture. There's no reason at all. Well, you can definitely see that as a value, but there's no reason you should give up this much. People listening to the audio version, I'm holding my index close to my thumb right now, and to imply a little bit. There's no reason to give up this much of your career, of your chosen values, of anything that's really important to you for the sake of your tribe. And then when it comes to the nation, you can definitely make decisions that you think benefit your nation. Let's say you want to hire people in your country for some reason. I don't think it really benefits anybody for you to act against the interests of your business. But if you're the sole shareholder of your business and you choose not to utilize foreign labor, but only to hire local workers, I could understand I could see that as being basically rational in some context, but certainly it should not be out of duty. You should not see that as something that's important to sustain the nation. And I think the nation, so to speak, the country is better off if you don't do that. As Yaron Brook pointed out, there's more production today in the U.S. than any time before, with half as many workers. So it's technology that has displaced the American workers. And so it's not foreigners, it's not immigrants, and it's not foreign labor overseas. It really mostly is technology that has eliminated many people's jobs in America. And many new jobs have sprung up, as Silicon Valley has demonstrated, and many new opportunities. So there's definitely no reason on earth to think that we all need to be civic minded and have this nationalistic code to follow, this duty to follow in order to sustain the civilization that we value. Capitalism does a much better job at both creating jobs and improving people's increasing opportunities, etc. So I definitely, and I think the objectivists would agree, there's no reason for the nation, quote unquote, to have any sort of high priority, if any priority, in your decision making. So Yoram Hazony, again, he sees individualism as incomplete and unsustainable, and I think he largely misunderstands where the Ayn Rand students are coming from with this. I think he would, if he's interested, and I think many people should be interested in understanding Ayn Rand's philosophy better. I think she's largely misunderstood, and that's an understatement. I mean, look how long it takes you and me as fans of Ayn Rand to really start to really understand the point, to really understand the depth. I mean, philosophy is very, very complex. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to really understand. So needless to say, although I've now said it a number of times, a lot of people like Yoram misunderstand it. But also, I'll repeat, many philosophers and many thinkers, such as Yoram Hazony, have repeatedly pointed out that selfishness alone does not satisfy you. It will not make you happy. But I think if all that is true, then that would be reason to stick with, let's say, the family that you've chosen to create. Maybe not to walk out as soon as things get a little bit challenging. So ultimately, selfishness is at play when you make value judgments. But Yoram has what I think is kind of a hedonist view of selfishness and individualism, or he thinks without duty, there's no way anyone will stick with, let's say, their marriage. And he points to the, divorce. He says, yeah, in the culture we've crafted here, people think you're a sucker if you stick with your marriage and stuff like that. Now, this is an instance where I will remind the audience, I don't think we should laugh at him when he says things like that. There are reasons that this point of view, that this position came about. A lot of people feel like the culture we live in has left them behind, or that is not working for them. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. So I could say, having, lived in the suburbs in the US through high school and my 20s, I've seen a lot of marriages not work out. And oftentimes, I mean, it can come from either side of the gender split. Let's say I'll start with men's grievances, for all the no nonsense, red-pilled men's rights advocates. A lot of men, let's say, might report to you they got married, they were fully dedicated to their marriage, they pursued a career, both out of passion as well as to be able to provide a good life for their wife and kids. And as they're doing this, as they're working hard, their wife is getting bored, complacent, just generally unsatisfied. Her attitude is getting bitchier. She's less pleasant over time. Maybe in some cases she's cheating. She ends up filing for divorce. Just in many cases, men would feel like, I would actually have benefited if marriage was taken more seriously in the culture, if there was this sort of duty in the culture, like this sort of pressure saying that divorce is stigmatized. So they would hear Yoram Hazony and they would say, yeah, you know what? I agree that this pursuit of happiness in all respects has sort of it's ruined things like marriage. Now, on the flip side, now we'll talk about what some women might say they've gone through. Similarly, they feel like, they got married, and then what do they find? 10, 15 years into the marriage, their husband decides, you know what, I've had enough of this marriage. He divorces her. He still supports her and the kids financially, but he decided to marry somebody younger and to kind of start over, have, maybe a couple more kids with that. And kind of basically many women feel like they've been traded in like an automobile. So many of those women might say, like marriage maybe should be seen as kind of a duty or just something that there's stigma around breaking, or that you should be more focused on sticking with it, stick it out, as I think the saying goes. Now, I think there's a lot that can be said about marriage, about why so many marriages end. Should they stay together? Is it in the interest of people? What causes people to be in a place where they end up deciding to end their marriages? Does it hurt the children, as I think conventional wisdom says? Like, do children end up feeling sort of rejected themselves because their parents rejected each other? Do the kids end up acting out? I think someone like Yoram Hazony and many conservatives would say this sort of degradation of the family, this high divorce rate, has brought about many young people that are angry, and they're acting like social justice warriors and burning down the world because their mom and dad don't love each other anymore. And it's easy to kind of laugh at them saying that, but I think there's somewhat a kernel of truth in these observations. There's also a lot of errors I think the conservatives are making, which we're not going to be able to get to now, basically because I'm still thinking about this stuff and I'm unprepared. But also, that's not the topic of the show. I'm just trying to kind of, I guess, paraphrase where I think Yoram is coming from with a lot of his points, and say, don't laugh at him. Also, he says at one point during the debate recently with Yaron, Yoram said, the like young people, they end up like joining a Nazi group or something like that. Like this kind of lack of direction, this lack of commitment in the culture makes them, some kids, young people end up joining a Nazi group to feel like they belong to something. Now, again, let's not laugh at him. This is true, by the way. Many people have and do join such groups. I would challenge Yoram and I would tell him, well, aren't the Nazis galvanizing around a race? Isn't that in essence what they're doing? I mean, among many other things. And aren't they also casting away reason? So something Yoram has said that I've heard in the past, like when he was first on the Dave Rubin show, maybe the only time he was on the Dave Rubin show, Rubin Report, Yoram Hazony, he says reason, it creates this ever-changing goalpost. So the reason advocates, the people who see themselves as rational, the secular rational, he calls them rationalists, but the advocates of reason, says Yoram, they keep on changing the rules. Like last year you were supposed to use this type of language. Now you're in trouble to use this. You need to use an updated type of language. They keep on changing the standards of what makes you good and bad, or what makes you racist or non-racist, for example. So Yoram definitely conflates the status quo with reason. Like I don't think he's quite aware of the degrees to which we live in a post-Enlightenment intellectual culture. So I would recommend reading Ayn Rand's For the New Intellectual, a very long essay in a book by the same name. And of course, I would also say read Leonard Peikoff's The Ominous Parallels. I think if you read The Ominous Parallels by Leonard Peikoff, you would have a very hard time still making the case that we live in this, individualistic, rational Enlightenment culture where, too much individualism has led us off the path of cohesion. So Yoram Hazony, he talks about cohesion a lot in his in his debate with Yaron recently. And again, there is a point to be made there that, yeah, cohesion in a culture is beneficial, or maybe it's even necessary. I'm not entirely sure what it should look like, but I know when we don't have it, we tend to have a hard time kind of coexisting. So we do tend to have kind of shared holidays, shared cultural references, Game of Thrones, let's say, we're all talking about it. I think the Black Lives Matter movement, it sort of played that role last year. For like at least a few days, like everyone was just kind of taking a break from everything else that was going on. And they were just kind of, not everyone, but like I'm using that word liberally. Many people on social media certainly were, and social media was what was our means of communication because we were still under lockdown. People were using this BLM sort of movement as their frame of reference. Like, okay, we all agree racism is bad, that the police did something horrendous to George Floyd. And for like at least a few days, that was like a huge kind of cultural glue that was tying a lot of people together. And the people that were opposed to BLM were kind of shy about speaking out against it for at least a few days. So I think there's an example of the culture kind of coming together over something. And the culture generally benefits from having something like that. You survey, I mean, and this was coming up a lot during the debate, like looking at history, seeing what works and what doesn't. So it's not that a caveman could just come up with Ayn Rand's philosophy and then civilization can come about. Of course, to have the vocabulary, to have the knowledge, the general principles of to have a philosophy, you do need to kind of survey reality for a while, and you do need to be inductive. It will become difficult at times to control for free will. So I think like Aristotle, he looked at the way people were living in Greece, and at least according to the book that I'm reading, The Cave in the Light, Aristotle was sort of forming ethics based on how he saw people behaving already. And I think someone like Ayn Rand would come along and say, well, there's a lot more ways people could act, more than just what you've seen in ancient Greece. But still, nonetheless, let's survey past civilizations and let's look at ancient Greece. They loved Homer. According to Leonard Peikoff's book, The Dim Hypothesis, Homer, the poet, was like their guy. He was kind of like the integrating figure for the ancient Greeks, or at least the Athenians. Every subject in school would include Homer in some way. Like math problems would include, like, okay, if Homer's, if Achilles has 3 apples and and the king steals 2 of them, how many apples does Achilles have left? I think that's an example of how they kind of would use Homer and Homer's work as a point of reference. And I think that's that can be a very healthy thing. So someone like Yoram Hazony, he's looking at the culture. He's seeing the fact that we're living in the Tower of Babel, that it's very difficult for us to communicate. We're getting so torn apart and drawn in various directions culturally. And he is saying what we need is national unity. He's saying we need religion as part of that national unity. But what we don't need, he says, is just individualism, period. And I think he conflates, in a lot of his examples, Yoram conflates family with politics. So he says, just like in your family, you can't just be like a lone island individual. You have your family, so too as a country or as a nation. I think that's a very problematic conflation. Also, I would not want the government to play parents. Yoram Hazony believes if we, craft the right type of government and elect certain people and tell them kind of how we want them to govern, then they can be trusted to govern us and to make executive decisions that in some cases will interfere with our individualistic desires. Again, I ask, why should I give up this much? Why? I did not sign up. I mean, Yoram might say, well, you choose to live in a country. But by the way, he actually says you don't choose where you're born. You don't choose who your parents are when you're born. So there's a lot we can't choose. He's making this point, I think, to say not all interactions are voluntary. So you can't just say the market will solve everything. I think he's sort of confusing objectivists for like more like libertarian types. Yoram thinks objectivists are saying the market will solve everything, or just if everything's voluntary, all problems will be solved, which is sort of what objectivists are saying. But there's like a whole ethics that comes with that, and there's like a whole there's a whole philosophical disposition that comes with that. Yoram Hazony, he says, not all interactions are voluntary. For example, you don't choose your parents when you're born. And I think the fallacy he's committing is similar to what skeptics do, like Sam Harris, when he argues against the existence and free will. Sam Harris says, name me 10 Bollywood actors. See, you can't do it unless you're Indian. And some of you are in India, and you can. But otherwise, you can't. So see, there's no free will, that you can't just choose to do anything. So it's a very, it's a fallacy. And if you read Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, the book by Leonard Peikoff, he tackles these types of fallacies head on. So I definitely would recommend reading that book. But that type of fallacy reminds me of what Yoram Hazony is doing when he says, not all interactions are voluntary. You don't choose your parents when you're born. Yeah, that's true. But after the metaphysically given is there, you do make many choices. This is called the man-made. Again, Ayn Rand goes into this in her literature, specifically in this case, the metaphysical versus the man-made. Is that the name of the essay? It's chapter 3 or 4, I think, in Philosophy Who Needs It. So I know there's like an essay or a book recommendation every step of the way here, but it's all really good stuff. Trust me on this. You'll thank me later if you haven't read it yet. Get busy reading. Yoram brings up taking care of his sick relative and how unpleasant it is. And it's not rewarding, but you just do it out of duty. You do it because that's, again, because individualism alone is not enough. And so in some cases, you'll end up with a mentally ill relative that you take care of. Dennis Prager has made similar points, like when his parents, at least one of them, was very out of it, very abusive, sort of emotionally abusive in their old age. Prager and his parent, like Prager, either his parents, he was either talking about his parents or his grandparents. But nonetheless, when a very old member of the family was very kind of out of it mentally and would be very kind of emotionally abusive, they would still call all the time, call every day, and just kind of take the abuse. Out of sort of this feeling, a sense of duty, or just it is a type of commitment to something. And again, I would not just laugh at it and dismiss it. There is something value driven in it, but it's not necessarily the right value. You can make that choice. Have your parents done enough for you that you want to put up with them in their old cranky age? Or no? Or are you going to say enough is enough? I should point out, capitalism creates so much abundance. If capitalism were allowed to be unfettered, we would have so much abundance just materially that nobody would need to worry, I think, about being taken care of in their old age. So a lot of these problems, they come about in this sort of default state, like in a non-prosperous, a culture that is not prosperous enough, where people need to worry about their helpless older parents. I think capitalism addresses a lot of these problems, and increased capitalism, and let alone laissez-faire, would bring about a culture where certainly nobody needs to take care of their parents, and much fewer people would even consider it to be something to consider. It's like they can just hire someone to take care of their parents' needs, and they can decide if they want to spend time with them based on their particular context. So I think the conservatives, they tend to sort of still have this subsistence farmer mentality, like if we don't cling together, we're going to starve, basically. So like duty and familial obligation is something we basically need for survival. And if we get too selfish, we're going to suffer in the end, and everyone's going to suffer, and the old people will starve and die, and the poor will starve and die. I think actual liberty, real capitalism eliminates a lot of these problems. And I think philosophy addresses a lot of our psychological issues. So in the same way, I think that the planet by its default is uninhabitable. We need to adjust the planet. Similarly, our psychology by default is not ready, is not equipped to live according to reality. We need philosophy. We need a proper way to understand and organize everything that we're experiencing. And that's a huge part of this whole thing. So it's yeah, I don't know a great way to kind of end this recap. I can only say I'm looking forward to seeing Yoram and Yaron speaking as they will, as I think they already have on the Lex Fridman show. I think they already had the conversation. I don't know when it's going to be released. So when it's released, I think we're planning to have another recap. This time, it won't be a solo episode. It will be, I'm guessing, me and Nikos. We tend to do a lot of these recaps together, but we will see. My throat is hurting. I just want to mention this fact, because a little bit of sympathy never hurt. See, I'm not a complete island, but also in that same spirit, what did I do today with a hurting throat? Did I say, I don't feel like hosting the show? Obviously, no. I showed up. I gave my word that I'll be here, and here I am. To me, there is no other conceivable way to deal with a chosen value, a chosen responsibility, unless the illness is really, really just too impossible to deal with. Is this out of a sense of duty? Of course not. I mean, to me, like work and creative output and giving the audience what they have been promised and guaranteed, to me, like this is like the adult version of when you're a kid playing with action figures on the floor. Like this to me is the adult version of that. This is like a playground to me, and it sometimes hurts. The adult version of having a youthful spirit is like includes paying your bills and sometimes stressing a little bit about stuff, but it's a different type of joy that you get out of life. But it doesn't come from duty in contra Yoram Hazony. It doesn't come from this feeling like, oh, I can't be too selfish. I need to suck up. I need to sacrifice. I think properly understood selfishness and properly understood reason, it perfectly integrates with sometimes acting when you're in pain to meet your chosen responsibilities and being a little bit uncomfortable. All right, in the super chat, Rat Lover sent 10 pounds. Thank you. Then another 10 pounds. Roland with $4.99 says, you had COVID, get better soon. Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that on the show. I had COVID and I could have it again. Fingers crossed. I'm joking. Obviously, I should be clear. I'm joking. But the joke is I would talk about it a lot on the shows, or I would mention it often. So it would give me something to talk about again and gives us something to bond over. See, relationship building is what we're doing. Marilyn with $5 says, do those guttural consonants make your throat hurt more? Is it PC to ask that? Oh, Yoram and Yaron? No, not even with this hurting throat. It does not hurt. English is my first language, but I'm fluent in pronunciation of Hebrew because I lived in Jerusalem as a kid. But from a fairly different kind of side of town from Yoram Hazony, even though he's religious, it was like a different crowd, like my environment that I grew up in was like very kind of loud, flashy, funny, like a lot of humor, music, just kind of like this larger than life attitude. If you can believe I came from that, I know I'm just so mild mannered and quiet now. Right. But that's kind of to me, like the affiliation I have with religious Jews in Israel. So where I think Yoram is coming from is this more kind of like the settlers, like the Zionist. It's a different type of. They're plenty religious, but it's like a different take. It's kind of like it's a different. It's like you have Presbyterians in Nebraska, kind of quieter, right? I'm assuming there's Presbyterians in Nebraska. And then you got, I don't know, Black Baptists in Texas, you know, clapping, singing, having a great time in church. See what I'm saying? They're all Christian, but there's kind of different crowds. And also, I think my upbringing was more superstitious and mystical than Yoram. So after the debate, a whole bunch of us were hanging around, and I asked Yoram, what do you think of the new prime minister in Israel? And I think he indicated like he and many others are very disappointed in the way Naftali Bennett got elected. Like I think he formed an alliance with some very unsavory folks just in order to get enough votes to become prime minister. And Yoram was saying like, we really don't like that. But before that, we did like him, let's say. So who is Naftali Bennett? When, from what I can see, he's also like this sort of settler type. He wears a yarmulke, but it's like almost falling off his head in the back of his head. Not very flashy, you know, not showing up with like fancy cufflinks, and he's not cracking a lot of jokes. Just kind of like a different crowd, right? Than the one maybe I grew up around in my little section of Jerusalem. And Yoram mentioned Naftali Bennett's VP, or however you would call her, his like second in command, or his running mate, is named Ayelet, which means doe, a deer, a female deer. And I said, wait, his name is Naftali, and his running mate or his VP is named Ayelet. Isn't that like a biblical connection? You know, like, and obvious, who doesn't know this? The 12 sons of Jacob each had like an animal or some sort of image assigned to them, kind of like with the Power Rangers. If you're from my generation, you might see this beautiful picture hanging behind me. The Power Rangers, each one of them had a special dinosaur assigned to them, you know, Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops. Similarly, each one of the 12 sons of Jacob, who would go on to be the 12 tribes of Israel, each one of them had a special picture assigned to them, like a special symbol, I should say. So like Judah is a lion. There's one. So Naphtali was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and his symbol is a deer. So I said to Yoram, I said, wait, Naftali Bennett's running mate is named after a doe? And he's just like, yeah, so I'm like, well, that's poetic. He's like, all right. Like, you can tell who came from like kind of a mystical upbringing, you know, like who, like referring to myself here, like looking for the meaningless connection and everything, like magnifying every coincidence like it's some sort of sign from God, right? You know, when the prime minister of Israel was assassinated, I was living there. I was 8 years old. Then there was like a verse in the Torah, in the Old Testament that week that was like, if you like reorganize the letters or you adjust the spacing, it like almost kind of spells out like two shots, you know, like the prime minister was shot twice, or like two shots hit Rabin, blah, blah, blah. It's just like God commanded. It's just like crazy people will come up with all these like interpretations and superstitious views. And I don't sense that someone like Yoram or his crowd, his sort of sect of Judaism, I don't sense that they're very superstitious in that way. So that's kind of obviously a point in their favor. They're much more grounded, much more attuned to reality. But there are ways in which their way of life just doesn't really speak to me, to my values. They're not very excitable. They're not very funny. They're not very, I guess that pretty much covers it. Okay, back to the super chat. Eric with $5 says, did Yoram have a method to distinguish between good traditions versus bad, or is he just anti-subjectivism? Most intrinsicists only want to preserve tribes. Yeah, there's a lot of objectivist language there, you know, intrinsicists, etc. But yeah, at one point, Yoram, he said something like America, like innovated, like slavery is an American innovation. Of course, that is like an outrageously wrong thing. And he was saying the Americans should have instead respected the tradition of their motherland, England, and not had slaves. And the easy response to that, as many people I think would make at that time, and even sort of did make, is like, well, why stop there? You know, like basically they said like slavery is a tradition, right? Before the British abolished slavery, They had slaves. Everyone had slaves going back to the dawn of time. So why does tradition mean respecting this particular tradition? Seems very arbitrary. And I think Yoram would say, as I think he did say, well, no, you see what worked and what didn't work, and that's how you select your traditions. Okay, then you don't need to call it tradition, and you don't need to elevate tradition above the rights and desires of individuals. You can literally just say part of being rational means learning the lessons of your ancestors and your contemporaries. All right, I'll calm down because my throat is about to die. All right. That's all the super chats. Thank you all very much for being here today. Kirk Wilcox in the non-super chat, basically where just the lowest elements of society, hang around. They post free comments with no dollars attached, which give a lot of strength to the nationalists. Like Yoram Hazony, he points at non-super chatters and says, look how depraved people get without nationalism. But nonetheless, Kirk says, imagine if the Power Rangers were individualists. Never would have created the Megazord. The collective is stronger than the individual. Yeah, that's right. All those Zords, the dinosaur robots, would combine into one. So there is strength in unity, but it needs to be voluntary. It needs to be chosen. And, Yoram was saying, he said at one point, they don't teach you in philosophy of liberty class or philosophy of freedom class to honor your spouse. Again, like he thinks that objectivists are saying, just act like you're in the marketplace, like ask your wife every day. This goes back to one of the interviews Ayn Rand had on TV once, where the interviewer said, so should a husband and wife keep tally, like every day say, here's what you've done for me and here's what I'm going to do for you. Like it's a caricature of objectivism. No, like a marriage, according to objectivism, I think would look a lot like a good marriage of a non-objectivist couple. It's two rational people who love themselves, love their life, and love one another, enjoying each other's companionship and growing together along spiritual lines. Do you know where I got that line, grow together along spiritual lines? From Mel Gibson, when he was yelling at his girlfriend, losing his S, and yelling at her, I wanted to grow with you along spiritual lines. I mean, I don't agree with the way Mel Gibson has expressed himself in many cases, but that's a nice thing to say. I want to grow with you along spiritual lines. And of course, by spiritual, in objectivist terms, we mean things pertaining not to pure material, but to, this consciousness, right? Ideas, values, I think is the word I'm grappling for, values. All right, everybody. Jesus Christ, I should not be talking this long. My throat hurts. If this is the last time you ever see me, I just want to be clear. COVID does exist, and I am not, depressed in any way. I'm not just saying if Hillary Clinton is seen leaving my building and then you find me hanging somewhere, I don't know why I'm even saying this right now. This is largely inappropriate, but it's obviously a joke. I expect to see you guys next week along with the other hosts, but if this is, COVID 2021, this could be goodbye. So hope you remember the good times. All right. Announcement time. I think so. Coming up at 8 p.m. UK time, it's James Valiant and Rosie Ginsburg. Now that's a treat. Obviously, James Valiant is a treat in of itself, but Rosie Ginsburg, the Lord Emperor behind the scenes, joined James Valiant to talk about the lecture by Leonard Peikoff, America versus Americans. Now that is a classic lecture by Peikoff, and this is going to be a classic discussion. Rosie comes to life when it comes to foreign policy and war. Just nothing seems to make him as passionate for life like the thought of, bombing people overseas. I'm joking, of course, it should be clear. There is no celebration in bombing people, but there is celebration in self-defense and moral. There is moral righteousness. There is moral confidence in doing it properly. Marilyn with 149 in the super chat, a picture of a rose. Thank you. That's very sweet. Kirk Wilcox, the aforementioned, with $2 American. Wow. Big spender. He says, Thank you for the show today. Oh, you're welcome. I'm just over here about to drop dead from my hurting throat. And Rat Lover with 10 pounds says, awesome debate and awesome points in this stream. And I hope your voice gets better as soon as possible. Thanks. Actually, I don't know if you knew this, but I need to use my voice to make beautiful art. So say a prayer for me. Yoram Hazony, wherever you are, I can use all the help I can get. Please say a prayer. All right. And then coming up at 8 p.m. UK time, well, actually, even before 8 p.m. at 7 p.m. UK time, the notes here are sent to me in reverse order. Don't blame me. This was the note. This is producer's responsibility, and he will be dealt with. At 7 p.m. UK time, it's the Integrating Investor with Seth Levine, and he'll be talking about, can gold play a role in investment portfolios? You'll find that out. That's at 7 p.m. UK time. And then, of course, at 8 p.m. UK time, it's James Valiant and Rosie Ginsburg discussing the Leonard Peikoff essay, America versus Americans. I apologize if I said anything strange or outlandish today. I can truly claim mental and physical insanity. All right, everybody. Thank you. We're going to jump over to Clubhouse, I suppose. I will be silent as a mouse. So you'd better be ready to raise your hand and come on stage and say something, or else it's going to be a none too interesting session. And like I said, Yaron and Yoram are going to be talking on the Lex Fridman show, so you can expect a recap of that with more than just me, and that's going to be a chance for you. You'll have a chance to obviously watch the initial debate as well as the Lex Fridman show. That's all. Thank you for sitting through this filibuster. Have a wonderful weekend, and goodbye.